Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 54, which goes down this Saturday night, headlined with a fight at the top of the light heavyweight division between Jan Blachowicz and Aleksandar Rakic. Well, just before I get into the breakdowns, as always, we will be producing a Base AI recap from last weekend at UFC 274. That'll be a separate video on our YouTube channel, so make sure you go to our YouTube channel and see the Base AI playlist and don't miss that breakdown. But straight into the breakdowns here now for UFC Vegas 54. We're into the main event. Like I've already said, a fight at the top of the light heavyweight division. We've got Jan Blachowicz versus Aleksandar Rakic, and this is going to be a good fight. I do think it's going to be competitive in parts, but I do also think it's a sort of passing of the torch kind of fight. I think that Aleksandar Rakic is going to have just a little bit too much on the night for Blachowicz. I think Rakic has got the edge in explosiveness, athleticism. I think the power sides with Rakic as well, even though obviously everybody calls Jan Blachowicz Polish power. He doesn't have that many knockouts compared to how many fights that he's had in professional MMA. That's not to say he hasn't got power, and that's not to say that he can't knock Alex out either, because he has got power and he could definitely knock Alex out. You know, the one issue that I've always had with Alex's game is that his chin is left quite high, especially when moving backwards, and it's also left high in boxing exchanges as well, in wild exchanges inside that boxing range. So those are the two issues that I do have with Alex, and like I said, I've had that with had those sort of issues with Alex for as long as he's been in the UFC. But aside from that, no fighter's perfect. Every fighter's got a hole somewhere, and I feel that outside of those weaknesses or holes that Aleksandar Rakic has got in regards to his striking defense, he's a phenomenal fighter. Like I said, he's big, he's a physical, athletic freak, and he's going to have a big speed advantage in this fight. I think he's going to have a power edge as well, and like I say, the athleticism will help him. The powerful low kicks, he doesn't take many of those before his opponents really start feeling them and being dropped. And then, like I said, even though the hands aren't necessarily the best part of Aleksandar Rakic's striking game, he's still got insane power in his hands as well. But what I love from Rakic is how he switches stances, and he's able to throw powerful kicks from both stances. That's going to help in this fight, because if Blachowicz does decide to switch stances, or if one of his legs is hurt and he switches stances, then Alex can switch stances with him and then still be firing to wherever he wants to target. Even if he wants to go opposite stances and fire to the open body of Jan Blachowicz, then that's an option for him as well. From Jan Blachowicz's perspective, I just don't think he's active enough. I don't think he's erratic enough on the feet, and I don't mean that in like he should be all over the place, but I just feel that his movement is a little slow. It's a little plodding, stalking type of movement, and for someone like Rakic, I think he's going to be able to really capitalize on that and land the strikes that he needs to land on Blachowicz. Again, the only other, not red flag I would say, but the only other question mark we've got on Alex is if this fight does get stretched into round 4 and round 5, what's he going to look like? But to be honest with you, like I said, we've worked with Alex before. His weight cut is barely nothing. Like I say, he shreds the weight off. He doesn't have a tough weight cut. He's just an athletic freak. So in regards to the cardio and being able to push through, I do think he can do that. But then also he's got his wrestling as well. Now again, he does have to be careful because Blachowicz is a black belt in BJJ. But I do think that if anyone's going to be engaging in the wrestling, and more importantly being successful in the wrestling, then I think it's more likely to be Alex. So I feel that, like I said, it's going to be competitive in parts, but I think Alex does have the edge in the areas that matter: the speed, the movement, the power, and I think he's also got a couple of paths to victory as well. So I'm picking Aleksandar Rakic to win this fight. And in the co-main event, we've got Ryan Spann versus Ion Cutelaba. I feel like this fight is going to be fireworks for as long as it lasts. Ryan Spann's huge for the division, big, powerful. Again, another real explosive light heavyweight fight. But then Ion Cutelaba, on the flip side, is just an absolute animal. Power, wrestling, he's hot-headed, he'll come in and wing bombs at you, he'll make life uncomfortable for you inside the cage. The thing is, I feel that Cutelaba's fought the better quality of competition, and just like I said with Rakic in the last fight, I feel like Ion Cutelaba could potentially win a fight based on the fight being won and lost on the feet, and I also think he could win a fight with the fight based on the wrestling and grappling. Now, Cutelaba's grappling's not amazing, but his wrestling's good. He comes from a Greco-Roman wrestling background. I think he can score takedowns in this fight if he wants them. And from Ryan Spann's perspective, the majority of Ryan Spann's fights come via finish, so with a knockout, or he's got a good guillotine choke as well. Now, knocking Ion Cutelaba out, I don't think is going to be easy. I think Ion Cutelaba is tough, he can take shots, and if Ryan Spann doesn't do that within the first few minutes of the fight, I think he might come unstuck a little bit later. Cutelaba does slow down, but Ryan Spann slows down the longer fights go on as well. So I feel that for Ryan Spann, the best way he could possibly win this fight is by hoping that Cutelaba shoots early while they're dry and fresh and trying to lock up a guillotine. But outside of that, like I said, I think Cutelaba's more experienced. He's fought the better level of competition. And like I've already said, I feel like he's the better striker. He's the better wrestler. Those two things should matter depending on which way Cutelaba wants to take this fight in regards to his game plan. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ion Cutelaba to win this fight. And in the next fight, this should be a fun one. We've got Louis Smolka versus Davey Grant. And I think the UFC are actually throwing Davey Grant a bit of a bone here. I don't think it's going to be an easy fight, but compared to his last two fights against Adrian Yanez and Marlon Chito, it's a step down in competition. It's a very winnable fight for Davey Grant. Listen, Davey Grant did phenomenal against Adrian Yanez, who in my opinion is one of the brighter sparks in the division. And obviously Marlon Chito, we've just seen what he did against Rob Font. He's now at the top of the division. So the fact that Davey Grant went to war with Marlon Vera and looked decent in parts, and then looked decent in parts against Adrian Yanez as well. I feel like Davey Grant's actually a really underrated fighter. His striking is a Muay Thai style, but like I said, he's got no problems getting into a war, throwing elbows, exchanging inside of boxing range. He's got sneaky power as well, but then his base is actually on the mat. His jiu-jitsu is really good. So I feel with Smolka, I think Smolka's in trouble on the feet. I think Grant's just going to be quicker. I think he's going to hit harder. He throws with more variety and he throws more volume. So on the feet, Smolka's going to be competitive somewhat. I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash, but I don't see Davey Grant being beaten by Smolka on the feet. So then if Smolka decides to wrestle and go to the mat, Smolka's BJJ is good himself. I don't think that Grant should be overlooking that, but Davey Grant's going to be good enough on the mat to at least stay safe and get back up to his feet so he can start striking again. But then if Davey Grant gets on top of Smolka, then he might be able to do good work there. Ultimately, I feel that the grappling's quite nullified in this fight. I do feel if Grant takes Smolka down, Smolka's going to find a way back up to his feet safely and vice versa, just because they're both good enough. None of them are BJJ aces to a level of like a Damian Maia or anything like that, but both are good enough to be able to be defensively sound, which means that the fight should be won and lost on the feet, and that's where I absolutely favour Davey Grant. So I'm picking Davey Grant to win this fight. And in the next fight, talking of step-ups, Katlyn Chookagian versus Amanda Ribas. Amanda Ribas has got a big step up in competition here. She has fought a good level of competition to an extent with Mackenzie Dern, but in fairness, Mackenzie Dern, when Amanda Ribas fought her, wasn't anywhere close to where she is now in regards to a mixed martial artist. The one thing I will give Amanda Ribas credit for is she was able to nullify the jiu-jitsu of Dern, which is definitely an eye-opener, because regardless of Dern, if Dern has rapidly improved since that last fight, which she absolutely has, she was still a world-class elite BJJ grappler back then as well. So Amanda Ribas, her jiu-jitsu is the best part of the game, but her wrestling is still to catch up to that, and that's where I think the problem's going to come in this fight with Katlyn Chookagian, who is been at the top of the division for a long time, for many years, for a reason. She's a point scoring striker. She does enough to edge fights. She puts volume together. She makes sure she comes forwards at the right time. She's gone to a decision 16 times out of 21 fights, and she's 14-2 on the cards. That's 10-2 in the UFC. The only two losses that she's took on a decision were split decisions as well. And also, more importantly, the wins, the 10-2 in the UFC, I think all of those, aside from one, have been a unanimous decision as well, which tells you that the judges are always seeing an edge in what Chookagian's doing. The fights are never that close that it gets real sketchy on the scorecards when Chookagian wins. So again, that's another plus part for her. I don't think she's going to be able to finish Amanda Ribas, but I do think it's going to be a typical Katlyn Chookagian fight. I think she's going to go in there. I think she's going to land more volume. I think she's going to get hit as well. Like I said, she's not a perfect fighter, and Amanda Ribas can strike well to a certain extent, but I think with Ribas, she lacks a little conviction in her punches and her kicks. She can start getting a little bit wild with them, spin kicks, kick into the head while she's not found a range, and the speed on the kicks aren't the quickest either. So I feel that if she does start kicking at Chookagian is going to be able to find the punches and the boxing there first before the kicks get anywhere close. And Chookagian's been here a million times with these sort of fights, going to a decision. She's comfortable going 3 rounds. She barely breaks a sweat. She doesn't get tired. And I think that Ribas is going to start getting frustrated. I think that Ribas might be able to get a takedown or two in this fight. In every single Amanda Ribas fight in the UFC, she's managed to score a takedown. The thing is here, with Katlyn Chookagian, she's a brown belt under Renzo Gracie in jiu-jitsu. A jiu-jitsu I don't think is going to be good enough to cause Ribas any problems from a submission or an attacking perspective, but at least to get back up to her feet and make this fight won and lost on the feet, I think is absolutely there for Chookagian. Like I said, I think it's going to be a typical Katlyn Chookagian fight. I'm picking Katlyn Chookagian to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the return of Frank Camacho, and he's fighting the newcomer Manuel Torres. Now, Frank Camacho, his last fight, it wasn't a great look for him. He was knocked out by a fighter that is no longer in the UFC and a fighter that I don't think won a UFC fight apart from that one. So it wasn't a great look for Frank Camacho. But the thing is with Manuel Torres, he's coming in from the Contender Series. His striking looks to be developed. When you watch him outside of the Contender Series, he was a bit wild and a bit crazy in exchanges, and then in the Contender Series he seemed to have reined all that in a little bit, sharpened his tools, but he's still very much in a development process. He will throw kicks, he will throw punches, he'll mix it in together quite well. But actually, against Frank Camacho, who's a veteran in the UFC, even though he hasn't fought for a little bit, and the last time he fought he was knocked out, it was one of those flash knockout situations. Frank Camacho is a good fighter, he's a dangerous striker, he's also got sneaky wrestling, sneaky jiu-jitsu himself, he's very well-rounded, and I think that Manuel Torres is going to be able to pose some threat to Camacho, of course, because he is in a UFC fight, he is going to land punches, he is going to land kicks, but not only has Camacho got the experience and the veteran qualities to be able to see what's coming from Torres, adjust inside the cage and adapt to what's happening, but like I said, Frank Camacho, he's an absolute tank. He's got power in both hands, he's got power ripping to the body, ripping to the head, and he's got a wrestling and grappling game as well. So I do feel that it's one of those typical fights where a fighter's coming in from the Contender Series who look really good, really improved and developed, and put on a solid performance, that's now facing a gritty and tough UFC fighter test who's coming off a loss. And we see it quite often with these fighters coming in from the Contender Series. The UFC match them up well, like I said, against the experienced UFC fighters that aren't absolutely on form, if that makes sense. But I think this is a fight for Frank Camacho to win. I think he's going to be able to piece combinations together on the feet. He's going to get hit to the legs, he is going to get hit to the body and head as well, so he does have to be very mindful of his defense. But Camacho, outside of that last fight, he's a very tough fighter. I think he's going to piece his combinations together well, and more importantly, he's got multiple ways to win this fight, because he could also take Torres down to the mat, and like I said, his jiu-jitsu game on top is good enough to lay heavy on top and grind minutes of the rounds out and ultimately win those rounds. So a couple of paths to victory for Frank Camacho, plus the experience, plus the power and the danger side on his side. I'm picking Frank Camacho to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one of my favourite fights on the entire card. We've got Jake Hadley finally making his UFC debut versus Allan Nascimento. Now, Jake Hadley has got good striking. He reminds me a lot of Leon Edwards in a way because of how well-rounded he is. So Jake Hadley's got good striking, he's got good power, it's clean, it's crisp. And when I say power, it's power, snapping power, not ultimately one-punch devastating knockout power, but it's still got snapping power behind his strikes. He's got a decent wrestling game as well. He can get in on a takedown and take his opponent down. And his jiu-jitsu, even top and bottom, they're both decent. We saw him on his back in the Contender Series and he was trying to lock up omoplatas, gogoplatas, and he's very flexible. The dexterity in his legs is really good, so you've got to be careful if you're on top of him. But if he's on top of you, he can lay heavy, he can look for submissions, he does like to get round to the back as well. All his submissions have come by rear naked choke, so that definitely seems to be where he favours the fight to go on the mat. Jake Hadley's a good all-round fighter, but then when we're looking at Allan Nascimento trains out of Shooter Box Diego Lima, which is the same place as guys like Charles Do Bronx Oliveira, Daniel Willie Cat Santos. So his Muay Thai is really good. You can see that his striking's developing and being put together well. He's aggressive, he'll rip kicks to the legs, to the body, to the head, he'll throw in elbows. His boxing's decent, he's got no problems getting into exchanges, and he can put on a lot of volume and a high pace for 3 rounds without getting too tired either. So he's got good cardio, which is always a good box to check. But then his jiu-jitsu game is 113 fights via submission, so although his striking's good, his jiu-jitsu's absolutely wicked, and you'll see that against in his last fight against Tagir Ulanbekov. Now, the reason Ulanbekov eventually pulled away with that fight is because he's a typical Dagestani-born wrestler, the prodigy of Khabib Nurmagomedov, and those guys just lay heavy in a different way on top. So even with that being said, Nascimento was constantly chaining submission after submission, making it very tough for Ulanbekov to look good in the fight. Even from bottom, he was landing good elbows and, like I said, just attacking submissions to the point that it was a split decision. One judge scored that fight for Nascimento based on the work he was doing on bottom, which is, that just speaks volumes. But then in the scrambles, his scrambling ability is absolutely insane. He goes and has submitted opponents with many different submissions. He'll go for the legs, he'll go for your arm, he'll sweep, he'll reverse. He's just an absolute nightmare on the mat. So this is why the fight's amazing, because I do feel that Jake Hadley's got the slightly cleaner striking on the feet, but I think that Nascimento's going to come with more pressure and volume. So that's going to be a little battle in itself. But ultimately, I do feel that this fight is going to be won and lost based on what happens in those wrestling and grappling moments. And I just feel that Nascimento's the better grappler. And you look at the Hadley and Paiva fight, and listen, and Allan Nascimento's on a 2-fight losing streak, but both of those 2 fights have come to, like I said, Hadley and Paiva and Tagir Ulanbekov. So 2 phenomenal fighters, and you could argue that Allan Nascimento on a different night might have actually been 2-0 against those guys, 2 wins. So I think that Jake Hadley's good. I think that he's going to have a good career in the UFC. He's still super young, so he's going to be developing. I think his skill set's really good. And once he does develop, I think he's going to be a natural problem in the flyweight division. But right now, in this fight, I think that Nascimento's going to have too much for him. The striking's going to be close, but Nascimento's grappling, scrambling ability could potentially either land himself in a submission opportunity where he takes Hadley out, or I think he's just going to be able to have good moments within those grappling scenarios, get on top and do good work. So for this fight, I'm picking Allan Nascimento to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Viviane Araujo versus Andrea Lee. Now, an interesting fight here. Araujo is actually a really solid fighter. She's got good striking, she's got power, her movement's great, her jiu-jitsu's great. Even when she's on bottom, she can attack, but when she's on top, she's dangerous. The problem with Araujo is that gas tank in the 3rd round, and it's the same thing every single fight. And it almost begs the question to why she hasn't really tried to fix this, or maybe she has and it is just unfixable, who knows. But Araujo, if she had the same round 3 as she had in round 1 and 2, then you could be looking at a future champion. But then when she's going into rounds 4 and 5, when she's at the top of the division, then I think that's where she's going to come unstuck. But in this fight, it's not a 5-round fight, it's a 3-round fight. She's fighting Andrea Lee, who's well-rounded. She's got decent striking, she's got decent wrestling, decent topside control. But I think that it's going to be a typical Araujo fight. I think Araujo's going to start well. She's going to be dangerous. She's going to hit hard. She's going to force Andrea Lee backwards. I think she's going to land the strikes that she needs to be able to take the 1st round and the 2nd round. She might even take Andrea Lee down as well. But after that 1st and 2nd round of all the activity, of all the power, maybe the takedown attempts, I think we're then going to see Araujo slow down. Andrea Lee is going to take over the 3rd round, and it ultimately is going to come down to whether she's going to be able to find that finish or not, and I just don't think she is. I think that Andrea Lee will have a good 3rd round against Araujo, but I think Araujo will be able to survive. I think Araujo, as a 2-round fighter, is an absolute problem in this division. Like I said, her speed, her movement, her combinations, everything she puts together. I think she's better than a lot of fighters in the division, but that round 3 is always going to be the issue. Unfortunately for Andrea Lee, I don't think she gets that finish in round 3, so I'm picking Viviane Araujo to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight where it feels like it's the loser leaves town. We've got Michael Johnson versus Allan Patrick. Allan Johnson, the speed that he's got in his hands, his striking, his boxing has always been lightning quick, really technical, and is a difficult fighter to deal with from that perspective. On the flip side, Allan Patrick has always been that fighter that's able to get in on the takedowns, will relentlessly wrestle if he needs to and shoot 8, 9, 10, 11 takedowns, so he can get on top of you, lay heavy, grind away, make sure he does just enough for the referee not to split them up and stand him back up to his feet and just win rounds that way. He's always been that dominant fighter. So we have got a clash of styles. I do think that both fighters, even though they've got their advantages in the different areas. I think their holes and weaknesses in MMA is their opponent's strength as well, so it's going to make for a good fight. I do think that Michael Johnson has probably got a 1-round window here to really light Patrick up and to knock him out. I think if he doesn't knock him out early, I think Patrick is going to be able to get in on the takedowns. I think he is going to be able to take Michael Johnson down. We've seen Michael Johnson not break a little bit, but just lose his morale a little bit once he starts getting taken down time and time again. And I do think that Alan Patrick's top game is going to be enough to keep Michael Johnson down should he be able to get him down. But the problem is with Alan Patrick is he's so hittable. He's slow on the feet as well, and his defensive striking is nowhere close to the offensive striking of Johnson, which is why I think that Johnson is going to have a lot of success early. But I actually think that Patrick can weather a bit of a storm. You know, he weathered a storm against Mason Jones until he did quit and find a way out. I don't even care by saying that who it offends, because it was very obvious what he did against Mason Jones. But the fact that he still wasn't knocked out by the time he quit in that fight tells me that he is going to be able to have some sort of durability here. Same with Bobby Green. Bobby Green was lighting him up as well, and he had durability there. So I think he's going to be able to take what Michael Johnson offers. I think he's going to be able to find the takedowns and pull away late in this fight. So I'm picking Alan Patrick to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Virna Jandiroba versus Angela Hill. And talking of clash of styles, this is another one. Angela Hill, absolutely a Muay Thai type of striker. She'll move forward, she'll land in combinations, she'll throw punches, she'll throw elbows, she'll mix in kicks. Her movement's good, she slides in and out of range really well. Then from Jandiroba's perspective, she's a world-class grappler, BJJ black belt. And although her wrestling is improving, I said this earlier on in this podcast, it just hasn't caught up to her grappling abilities. And that's where the problem's going to be in this fight, because Angela Hill is going to be able to, defend the takedowns and keep this fight vertical. And if she is taken down, she does a good job of scrambling right back up to her feet without being settled. Now, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that Virna Jandiroba wouldn't be able to take Angela Hill down and maybe control her for a couple of minutes in one of the rounds, but we're talking over 3 rounds here, unless she was to get Angela Hill out of there via submission, which again I think is going to be difficult. I do feel that Angela Hill is going to be able to keep this fight on the feet long enough for the more significant action to be on the feet and the fight to be won and lost in that striking department. So because of that, I have to favour Angela Hill. I think she's going to be able to put combinations together well. I think Jandiroba is going to be out of her depth in regards to the strike, and I think she's going to get hit over 100 times here. I think Angela Hill's going to piece everything together really well. She's going to push Jandiroba on the back foot. Jandiroba's going to be shooting desperate takedowns and ultimately not being able to complete them. I think it's that type of fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Angela Hill to win this fight. And in the next fight, this should have happened 2 weeks ago, and one of these fighters was actually my fighter to watch for that event 2 weeks ago as well. So my breakdown, my analysis hasn't changed. I'm still going to be picking the same fighter, but the fight's Carlos Candelario versus Tatsuro Taira. And Tatsuro Taira, new to the UFC. When you look at his record, he will look like a fighter that you'd believe is just a submission specialist, a grappling specialist, just because of how many submissions are on his record. And although he is very good on the mat, his scrambling ability is good, his grappling's good, he's erratic on the mat, he seems to have that magnet for topside control or topside positioning. But he's also a very good striker as well. He's athletic, he's quick, he'll find angles, he'll really hone in on the areas where he really starts to hurt his opponent, so he'll recognise when his opponent is starting hurting somewhere. For example, in one of his previous fights, he started kicking to the legs. After 2 to 3 kicks, he realised that his opponent, even though the poker face was good, that his leg was starting to hurt, and he just really honed in on that and took advantage of it. So I feel that Tatsuro Taira's fight IQ's good. I think, like I said, his speed, his striking's good, his movement's good, his wrestling's good as well. He can get fights to the mat, and then his grappling's probably is the best part of his game, but he's a very well-rounded fighter. In regards to Carlos Candelario, he's another well-rounded fighter, but the thing is, I think that Taira's going to have, or at least going to be competitive with Candelario, maybe have the slight edge in regards to the striking, but if this fight does start hitting the mat and we do see the grappling exchanges, I think that Taira is going to look great in those scenarios. I think Taira is able to make this fight have significant enough moments on the mat to be able to either make this fight won and lost on the mat, or potentially get Candelario out of there with a submission, or take the fight to a decision where the judges are scoring based on that grappling. So I think that Taira can take this fight to where he needs it to be most comfortable. But if this fight doesn't hit the mat and there isn't those wrestling and grappling scenarios, then I think the fight's quite close on the feet, but I'd still favour Taira anyway. So I do think that Taira has all boxes checked here. I do think Candelario is going to be competitive in moments, in spots, but I think the fight is for the debutant, so I'm picking Tatsuro Taira to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a bit of a wrestler's delight here. We've got Nick Maximov versus Andrea Petroski. Both fighters are predominantly wrestlers. They love to get in close, they love to take their opponents down, use topside jiu-jitsu to really control their opponents as well. They're very much the same fighter, but I think that Nick Maximov is just the much better fighter in every area. I think he's going to be the better striker in this fight. He's the better wrestler. He's going to be the better grappler as well. And most importantly, the cardio on Maximov is just so much better than Petroski's. We've seen Petroski tire multiple times, even on The Ultimate Fighter, coming out of The Ultimate Fighter when he wrestles too hard and he's forced to wrestle. Even when he's offensively wrestling, he tires. But in this fight, he's going to have to defensively wrestle as well, which I think is going to hit the gas tank even more. Nick Maximov is a big favourite in this fight, and I can totally understand why. I do think, like I said, wherever the fight goes, whether it be the striking, the wrestling or grappling, I think Nick Maximov is better. I do feel that Petroski's got the more power in his strikes though, so maybe that's something that Maximov watches out for. But ultimately, I just find it very hard to see this fight not being won and lost within those wrestling and grappling moments. Sometimes when we have two fighters with the same style, we see the complete opposite fight take place. So for example, two wrestlers and it turns out to be a 15-minute kickboxing fight. I don't see that here. Both of these fighters are going to love to engage in the wrestling, and they're both going to want to get there first as well, and that's why I favour Nick Maximov. I just feel that, like I said, he's the better wrestler, and once the fight hits the mat, I think his jiu-jitsu is better as well, so I'm picking Nick Maximov to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you are betting on Saturday night, I wish you good luck. I hope you cash your tickets. If you do want to chat about any of the fights, tell me your bets, drop them in the comments. It's me that does reply to those comments on our YouTube channel. So we'll get conversations flowing and we'll get talking about the fights. As always, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for showing your support, subscribing to the channel, liking the video as well. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.